Guys, it's Verts here and welcome to 3D Mutiny. So in this video we're going to go through some characters and give a sense of formalized feedback from someone who's been in the games industry. So if you're interested in getting your own sorts of works reviewed by me and also peers, definitely come into the 3D Mutiny Discord channel and post your works in progress. It's a really good opportunity to stay accountable and also get feedback to improve your work. The last year was really successful. Loads of awesome characters came out and we finished with a live session. Some really cool characters to come and lots of lessons to learn from it that you can apply to your own works. So without further ado, let's get into the first character. So it's really nice to see that you've got some good anatomy skills and also skin surfacing, and also that you've tested your skills with an additional character, so a child character which has a completely different style of anatomy. There's a couple of points that we can go through on the face. So one of the first things that I naturally saw was the expression of the character. So usually when people are sculpting, say they want to do a specific expression like a frown or a smile, they tend to grab the sides of the mouth and then bring them up and down. When you think about a smile, it usually comes from muscles that are surrounding the mouth. If you touch your cheeks on the side of the sort of like near the bone, then smile, you'll see there's a lot of extension there. So you want to replicate that in your sculpt. So if this character is smiling, has that sort of look to him, you want to get some more. Second thing you want to be aware of is what I saw around the eye, and that's basically the transition of the eye down to the eye socket. Now I extracted this female character and you can see a little bit under the hood of how the eye interacts with the skull. So with this skin, it's basically flowing over a selection of both the eyeball, the muscle and also the bone. Now ideally we want to see certain landmarks in here. So if we zoom into this, for example, we've got one section of a bone, the next section will be some muscles, and then the final one will be the eyelid, or basically where the transition finishes. Now whenever you draw those out, especially if you're taking references from a character, you'll usually see that they're a little bit more spherical. So what I can see here is it's turned out a little bit flat and it's taking away from the realism. It might be because you're trying to fit in a tusk here and it's kind of like pushing all that skin up. But even if that is the case, just try and let a little bit more room for the bottom of the bone and also the transition of the muscles that are coming down. So instead of being flat, just try and make these a little bit more curved like that, and it will have a nicer effect. Next section is the nose's transition back onto itself. So primarily what I'm thinking about is this area, kind of this selection of skin that goes back onto the nose. Depending on the nose, usually what you find is this like it vanishes up back into itself and you won't see it transition. And also mostly as soon as you get to this section, there isn't so much of a prominent gap there. Usually you want to have that filled in with skin and transition a little bit more smoothly. Secondary form that you've done is pretty good, so everything's looking like skin, and it's also giving the age that I think this character is. One area that was a little bit confusing for me was basically the center of the nose here and how that anatomy works. So is that like an underlying bone, or is it like an extension of skin or fat? I didn't really know what it was. So I inspected it a little bit further, and from the side it seems to be protruding a little bit too far in comparison to the angle of the nose. So it could be that you're kind of going for this quirky style of whatever this creature is. But if you want to add the realism there, again, just try and find where this nose bone is. It's quite hard to discern what sort of shape it is. So if you are trying to make that really bulky, I suggest just making the nose bone sort of like go in this direction, just sharpening it up in specific areas, and bring back those planes of the face basically. On that same topic, where the child is on top of this character, I thought it would be a really cool opportunity to basically improve the sculpting in this area and how the leg transitions with the neck here. So for example, because these are touching each other, you want to have loads of skin folds and lots of pressure and compression, stretching of the skin. There's just like lots of opportunities for sculpting there. And it's going to add to the physicality of those two objects matching. And also it's going to give a sense of the skin and how much fat there is. So definitely come in and start to put some additional sculpting lines in there. I think it will really add to it. Overall, I think the sculpting is of good quality. Cloth belt here, and then just angle it down and have the back side higher. What's happening here is if we look at the face, everything is shrinking in slightly. So the eyes and the mouth and the nose are all getting pinched inwards towards the center. What you want to do is just let that space breathe a little bit. Could be that you get a move tool and just drag things outwards and let it expand a bit more. So if you look at this face, obviously the eyes are very large, so you might want to enlarge the eyeballs themselves and then also increase the width of the eye slit, because that's what a lot of the character's portrayal is here, right there, right here, that's quite small, but also there's a very slight squint there and a rotation in of the eyes. So if you do the opposite of everything I said there, hopefully it'll match the reference a little bit better. Could be also that if you observe the nose bridge, for example here, it's very small in comparison to the reference. So just increase the size of that and be confident with the nose bridge to like hold the structure of that face. And I think there'll be improvements there. The parts that you have done well is basically the structure of the chin leading up all the way to the cheekbone. So I think that shape is good. Also remember, what can sometimes be an illusion is if you see the underside nostrils of a character, usually it's because they're pointing upwards for ever so slightly. You don't really want to translate that into the anatomy too much, because what happens is they get basically like this pig nose look. So if you are after that reference, first pose in the angle that you want and then sculpt the character normally. It's a bit of an illusion, so I forgive you for this one. The reason it says illusion is because she's also got her jaw open. So what's happening is her jaw is staying stable or stabilized in space, and then it's coming upwards slightly, and then you can see the underside of her nostrils, and that's the position that's being given. So if you understand that first before you sculpt it, hopefully things will be a little bit more accurate there. Another area for improvement that I think will enhance the character a lot is basically the style and the drapery. So this is very straight and folded. It doesn't warp and wobble too much. And cloth is usually quite hard to do in ZBrush. Sometimes we can simulate it, or sometimes we can do it in Marvelous Designer. But I think what's happened here is a little bit too many edits on the cloth. And what's happened is give that wobbly effect. Whereas in the reference, we've got some nice straight lines that extend all the way down. So going through that draped, smooth look of the cape, basically what I'd do is I'd get a standard plane like this, get a simple standard brush, and then just make some deviations down there. Obviously, if it's a thinner material, then you'd have more of them. So I'm just going to do it really roughly so you can see the technical workflow for this. Then just go up the divisions and then add the generic noise. It doesn't have to be anything fancy because we're going to stretch this out and it's going to give a specific effect. When it comes to your one, you can either keep these very neat. I don't usually bother because what I do is I just cut the bottom off, and then it doesn't mean we have to faff around with the corners or edges, because that doesn't work too well in ZBrush. So spend as much time as you want on that one, and then basically what we'll do is we'll come to the move gizmo and stretch it out. And what that's going to give is a nice effect for a stretched cape. Now if you want to shape this a little bit better, you come into the cog and then we can come into the deformer. But obviously as it's a deformer, we first have to delete lower in geometry, so get rid of the subdivisions. Come into deformer, and then what that gives us is this FFD or lattice, if you're used to 3D programs. So what we can do is basically hold control and mask specific points on this, and then with the move gizmo we can come in and start to move this around. And basically what you can see is you can shape this around your character, and it's going to have a nice effect. So we don't have to continue to sculpt in 3D space and have like that wobbly effect. Usually what I do is I first unmask everything, so just draw a box off to the side and then hold Control and Alt, and that's almost like selecting points. So say for example the bottom of a cape, you can just drag that outwards and it gives this nice opened effect. And then for the center, if you wanted to arch it, we could just bring it forwards. So I'd suggest maybe recreating it, and then if you want to go back after, you can then enhance some of these sculpts and go back over them, or even if at the top you don't want them, you can smooth them out. But at least that's a nice basis for smooth transitions. And to be honest, it's better than simulation, because simulation is not going to be very accurate, and especially in ZBrush, it's not very good when it comes to simulations. The character we have here is this devil female character. Now this is also going to be a difficult pose, because a lot of the silhouette that's happening is coming from her left leg being in front of her right leg. So that's really hard to interpret when you're doing a T-pose or an A-pose character. Now what I suggest for this, if it's a portfolio piece, because it's going to be so hard to rig this cloth back on top, I would probably suggest actually physically sculpting this pose in, especially for the bottom section, then leaving the top section as a normal A pose for it to be rigged and positioned normally. Or you could go down the route of trying to learn how to do cloth rigging, but I wouldn't really suggest it there. So I think one area that could be improved is basically the shape of the cloth. So here you can see that there's a lot of shape and form and quite a broad curve that happens, and obviously it's flicking up. And a dress has a very similar language in terms of feathers to the feathers that are attached to her back. So if you try and just insert those somehow here, I think that would be an improvement. In terms of the face, I think it's a good representation. The only thing is that the face seems to be coming out a little bit. So for example, with the cheekbones and also the major face structures, they seem to be enlarging in comparison to the 2D concept. So just try and reduce those slightly and then push them back into the main head. That's going to help out with the effect. So on the wings here, I think you could do with a little bit more resolution just so you can get the desired shape that you want. It might be important to create individual blocks of feathers. So you won't use this for your sculpt, you'd actually use this for your concepting. But if you just create one and then duplicate it a couple of times and then duplicate that another set of times, you're going to have loads of feathers that you can work with and position. And then the advantage with that is you can get something like the move topological brush. And then what that's going to do is it's only going to move one of these, and then you can start to work with your silhouette and basically move those subtools to get the shape of the feathers that you want. So showing this in practice, what we can do is create an asset that's going to be useful for blocking out this wing, so you guys can use it on multiple projects. So what I'd usually do is don't fuss about creating the individual feather too much. You can put as much work as you want into it. Maybe just flatten it slightly with a trim brush, and then that'll be enough. Because what we're going to do is we're going to form these all together and then change the silhouettes. Might be an idea also to pinch the tip, and then that just means that the silhouette's going to be a little bit more accurate. So what I would do if I was doing your one, I'd basically duplicate this a couple of times and then just push it to the side, and then we can merge it down and connect them together. But basically a quick way of doing that is if you come here and then hold Control and then move the gizmo, it's going to duplicate it, but it's also going to attach it to the subtool. So we can do just like I was saying, you can position these as you want because it masks it nicely, but I'm not going to be too fussed because we're going to use a different brush to basically change that. So unmask it by drawing a Control and square, and then basically with BMT, which is move topological, the first one we touch is going to change that individual feather. So you can see how this can be useful for shaping the individual silhouettes basically around this area. And then when it comes to changing the full wing, we can just use the normal move brush, which will be BMV. And what that's going to do is going to move them all together. Now you're not going to worry too much about how it looks up here because we're going to re-sculpt that, or we can just put some more feathers on top of it to hide it. So the primary thing for this is just to get your concept out. So maybe you're resizing the scale of the wing like this, or changing its form and its line, and then you can come back in BMT and then just move each individual wing there. Once you've got the shape that you like, you can just start to drag some of these out, or maybe just even duplicate it again, move it off to the side slightly, come back to move topological. Now you've got some more resolution for your feathers. And then maybe you can dynamesh this all together and then just use that as your block out concept. Next is this elf looking character. So it's nice to see that you've taken it all into Marmoset. It could be that you're starting to test things out before you complete the full workflow. So before you go any further with that, there's a couple of suggestions that I have. And I think what's happening here with the character is it's suffering from a case of a long neck. And usually when that happens, it's because something's on the neck and then it's like throwing us off in terms of proportions. So I'd really suggest just bringing this down, to be honest, and shortening it. At the same time, while you're around this area, depends how accurate you want to be to the reference. I think one characteristic of this concept is the nose, and it's quite magnified and inflated. So if you look at the interpretation of the nose you've done, it's quite structured and classical, like you would see with sculpts. So maybe just translate a little bit more of the character back onto this nose. Same's true with the eyes. The eyes are slightly too deep set here, whereas on the concept what we've got is somewhat of a smoother transition across the nose bridge, and it doesn't go in so deep. So it gives more of like a youthful look in comparison to someone who's older or who has less like fat or body fat. I like the patterned effect that you've got going on here. I think you could take it one step further and just complete what is represented with these individual bits. I know it's quite a bit of a task, but I think it will be interesting on your sculpt, because if it's left to rest, then it's going to be quite flat. Something that you could do is be really intelligent as like a game artist, is basically create one unit of these. So just sculpt one of them, or sculpt maybe 5 and texture them, and then you can just place them as a low poly back on top of here. So that's how we do it in the games industry, is basically create a little physical unit of a low poly and then place it after the fact, so we don't have to sculpt them all as high polys and bake them all and unwrap them all individually. So there's a really good opportunity to both add some detail and also flex some technical skills when eventually you come to putting this on your portfolio. Another area that could potentially do with improvement is I saw around the metal. So it's the metal work, and I think it just needs a little bit more sharpening around the edges. Could be that you're also getting a little bit of baking errors, and funnily enough, the baking errors will vanish the sharper your transitions are and the more bevels you have in your low poly. So if you were going to redo this, I would just go over with some brushes like the trim dynamic and also the H polish. I've got a video on that, on how to do hard surface elements, and I've also got another video coming out in the next couple of weeks on how to make all these sorts of gears with those brushes. So it's really well timed. Then once that's all sharpened up, maybe you put like a broader bevel on it, we can come in with a low poly. And because there's more geometry on the low poly, it's going to get rid of most of your baking artifacts. So a majority of these baking artifacts come from a lack of geometry in those areas where the low poly is being misrepresented with the high poly. So that's going to solve a lot of issues. So the next character is this Shogun Mortal Kombat Asian character, and the thing that I like you've done here is basically laid out the level that you work to achieve, along with categories for like anatomy and a face likeness at the same time. So it's always good to have a face likeness so you can reference it to see if you've been accurate. It's nice to have the physical real life depiction of something you can copy and follow. So that being said, it depends how close you want to go with the reference. Looking at the character, what I can see is you might be a little bit too extravagant with the cheekbones, and they're basically popping outside of the main area of the face. Also the same with the brows as well. They seem to be protruding forwards a bit. So that usually happens when you observe something like a facial feature and then continuously try to reinsert it on top of the mesh that you've already done. And eventually what happens is these start to extend a little bit too far out. So what I suggest for most character artists is to do is basically look back and just try and tone it down slightly while continuing to keep the main features that are in there. So what I'm going to do for this face is basically make use of the liquefy feature. So it's a good habit to get into anyway. You can basically take your subject, select the layer, and then go into filter and then liquefy. So this is a good habit to get into. You can use a couple of the facial features. I think that's new in Photoshop. Those sometimes can be good. But what I do is I just simply put it on the reconstruct tool, and then with this you can start to budge facial features around. So making a couple of observations, I think an area that could be improved is basically around the lip. So for example, the top of this lip is maybe a little bit extended. So as you move it, it does blur it slightly, but you get the idea of the main form and function. So, and also that moustache is very big in comparison. So I'd actually extend this much wider, so it's closer to the character and the sort of vibe that's been given off. What I'd say is like also the nose bridge is quite small in comparison. So what we could do is just pinch that in slightly. Nice thing about this is it inserts a little bit of asymmetry at the same time. What's also happening is it seems that the nostrils are dropping down a little bit. So what I would do is I'd just get where they connect to the main head and then lift them up slightly and also pinch them. Something that we observed was that basically the cheekbone had a bit too much volume inside of it. So while it is in the correct position, there's just too much bulk behind it. So what I would do is just maybe shrink it down or pinch it and then bring it in so it's a little bit more realistic. Could be at the same time that the mouth barrel itself is getting a little bit wide in comparison. So because this character is quite old, the skin's getting like dehydrated and they're not very fat. The skin is basically like leading off from the cheekbones and falling down to around where the teeth are. So if you imagine that, it just means that these shades are going to go inwards. So I bring in the mouth capsules over in this section, and what that's naturally going to do, it's going to bring out the cheekbones. So instead of basically drawing outwards to make the cheekbones bigger, you're just pushing other pieces in and then it accentuates those cheekbones. So in a roundabout way, work around on everything that isn't the area that you're trying to increase, and in time it will just like reproportion it and make it look a lot larger. Depending on your side view, I'd also just track this back a little bit. When it comes down to the actual sculpt, I'll just blur the line and the transition there. It's a little bit too stylized or a little bit too hard for my liking, and then it'll be a bit more accurate to this character. Maybe also increase the size of the bottom lip just so it's a little bit bigger in comparison to the top of the lip, and that's really bringing out the actor's sort of like visuals. He has quite a small top lip as well. Could be also that the head is widening a little bit, so it depends if this is an orthographic view. I'll just bring the ears back and behind a little bit while keeping the cheekbone roughly in the right position. Okay, so you come along here and just basically adjust it for all eternity, for example, to match the reference. But these are the sort of edits that I would suspect you should put in, which will make a big difference. So once that's done, preview's on, you just press OK. And then the nice thing about this is if you hide and show it, you can see the very small differences that are made. So while it is extremely subtle, the new one on the left and the older one on the right, just like a reconstruction of the nose, repositioning of the cheekbones, and basically like the mouth area. You can see the mouth area has had quite a big impact on the accuracy to this reference. But yeah, overall good progress. Other areas just to double check is the interaction between the pectoral and the bicep, and also the deltoid muscles. Here it's almost looking a little bit too disconnected because you've gone quite hard either with the dam standard, and it doesn't flow back into the arm because all the muscles and tendons are actually holding onto the arm there. So you just want to soften that transition up a little bit more. But yeah, apart from that, I think the fingers are looking good. You've also got hand wraps. So I recently made a video on hand wraps. Maybe you implemented a couple of features there. So for example, the way I like to mask things, polygroup them and extend them, or even just use like the standard deformers to wrap physical pieces of bandage around. If you didn't, would be really interesting to see how you did that. So just post it into the Discord and share it. Next character is more of a stylized. Now these ones are always quite difficult when it comes to matching the references, because with these 2D drawings, the face actually changes its complete structure depending on the expression. So often what you'll find is the shape of the head and the size will actually warp and bend depending on the perspective and also the emotion. But there are some improvements that you can make to this sculpt that will make it a little bit more accurate in general. So one of the first areas I saw was similar to another, and that's the space above the breast, which is basically all sternum and it's all flat and pectoral. So with this, what you want to do, instead of having convex shape like it is here, you want to have more of a concave shape that goes inwards. And you can see that on a majority of the references here. So here, especially from that angle, and also here as well. So just get the move tool and then move all this geometry back inwards, and it's going to have like a better transition there. Also with the stylized characters, you've done a really good job with the nose there. I think that's like a nice depiction of what it is on this this concept. With the mouth, what I would do is I'd actually create a mouth box or some kind of inside cavity, and then that's going to separate the lips much better and more efficiently, because right now we can really evidently see that there's like a slit that goes down there. So if you want to increase the physicality of that, more of an overlap, because a lot of the mouth's look comes from how the two lips are interacting with each other and how they overlap on each other. So you don't have those separated, you can't take advantage of those sorts of features and those sorts of movements. So I'd highly suggest inserting a mouth box or separating those lips out. Also at the same time, I think you could just sharpen up, especially for a stylized character, just sharpen up these areas and these forms so they're a little bit closer to the reference. Make them nice and straight. You want to get rid of any sort of wobbliness, especially for stylized or Disney characters. The nice visuals come from the smooth transitions. So any sort of place where you have these hard inside lines that aren't smoothed out, that's going to take away from the nice CG Disney style. What I suggest for that is basically you could use a very hard soft brush and then also a trim dynamic. That's just going to like get rid of the edges and then soften it. Or I believe there's a brush in the menu sets called Smooth Strong or Smooth Ultra. And that's basically going to really smooth out any sort of imperfections there and give you more of that Disney look that you have, similar with the face here. So yeah, I also like how you've done the eyes and the interaction with the eyeball. Again, with anime and stylized characters, that's always very difficult. The only thing I would suggest is basically increase the size, especially from the front view of the eyelashes here. So right now you can only see the eyelashes really from the bottom view or the top view, whereas on a lot of the 2D concepts here, we can see them from the front perspective. So basically what you want to do is get these eyelashes and just pull them up ever so slightly. And that means that they can be displayed from the front, and then you can have that classic look of the eyelid. Next character we have here is a Wolverine character, and I think it's a very accurate depiction, especially from the first visual. Sometimes these can be a bit elusive, especially when you use very similar colours, and then under close inspection things might be slightly off. So we'll go inside and take a deeper look. Overall, I think it's a very high quality sculpt that you've done here. Obviously nice to see this in a low poly interpretation or a game mesh, but the renders come out nice and it's looking very similar to the reference here. So little bits of feedback that I saw is basically in terms of the surface sculpting, and that will help you when it comes to texturing. So when I look at this surface, it looks like a very hard, especially because it's how shiny it is, the highlights that are here. And there's also lots of scratches. I can imagine that if I got my knuckles and tapped on it, it would be a very hard and cold piece of like hard leather and dried. So on this sculpt, the only thing that's slightly inaccurate, I'd say, is it looks very soft and bouncy, and that's really hard to get away from when you're in ZBrush and you're sculpting things like clay. What I would do for this is just get an H polish and just dab it in certain places, and then what that's going to do is going to give this like a dabbled effect where it's sort of like the surface imperfections, and then the highlights can hit that more and it looks a little bit harder. That's something that I was always found. And also just insert your scratches, because when you insert the scratches inside of here, it's going to inform a lot about what the surface is. So depending on what type of scratch it is, if it's really hard and got rough corners, then we can see that it's a hard piece of metal or a hard piece of stone or granite, etc. If it's a really soft scratch, we can see that it's nice and soft and pillow-like. So use your surface detailing to basically like inform the thing you're trying to achieve there. But that was basically my interpretation of what this 2D concept was. The next area of improvement I would say is basically on the cloth folds. So you might have taken, I'm familiar with this, it might have come out of Marvelous Designer. It seems that the particle distance might have been a little bit too high, so it would have made a very low resolution and the render would have gone a bit wobbly. And also send it out via newsletter. So basic summary with tips and tricks to put onto your own projects. So make sure you're subscribed and also on the email list so I can send that out. So if you'd like your own feedback on next month's video, make sure you follow the link to the Discords. Really good community here in terms of getting help and feedback. Create works in progress forums to stay accountable for that character. Also every month, depending on these videos, I send out tips and tricks. So make sure you're on the email subscribe list. Also, when you do that, you get free resources. So things like retopology, common problems and fixes, and much more to come as well. So if you enjoyed that video, please like it so it's in your favorite so you can come back to it, and also subscribe so I can show you the future videos that I'll be doing in terms of hard surface game characters coming into the Unreal Engine. So thanks for watching and I'll catch you on the next one.